Hello and welcome to another edition of All Opinions Welcome. This week got a fascinating guest. It's Donnachadh McCarthy, the spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion, also the co-founder of Stop Killing Cyclists and author of the book The Prostitute State, How Britain's Democracy Was Bought. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you're protesting right now out there in Westminster.
That's right.
How's it going?
Well, we're on day 5 today, and we think, considering the amount of resources the police have thrown at us, we've been able to make our message really heard loud and clear, not just in London, but across the planet. We have protests going on in New York, Berlin, Adelaide, and in New Zealand. People being arrested for peacefully protesting because they're so despairing of the fact that the governments internationally are not taking the actions necessary. Okay,
so the founders of Extinction Rebellion have claimed that billions of people will die. How?
There's a threat of that happening. A number of scientists have stated that the world has got around 3 major bread baskets where most of our wheat, our rice and our flour originates. And they're saying that if 2 of those are hit by an extreme weather event simultaneously, there would be a massive disruption to the world's food supply. That could lead to an amazing amount of disruption in governments across the world, and so therefore they could result in mass starvation, and that's what that is based on.
Do you honestly think billions of people are going to die?
It's a possibility, and the fact is that if we do have runaway climate change, which is now seriously a possibility, scientists have said 4 to 6 degrees rise in temperature is incompatible with civilization as we know it. That's the science telling us that. And the fact is that if you look at the IPCC projections, we're at the top level of the predictions rather than the bottom, and that's terrifying. And so we're already at 1 degree rise. We've probably cannot avoid another ½ degree rise because of the amount that's been emitted already. And every year since the Kyoto Treaty was signed, every year since the Paris Treaty was signed, emissions have continued to soar. We are at absolute danger level.
Are you of the mind that global warming or climate change, whatever you want to call it, is solely as a result of human activity?
Vast majority of it. There will always, as you know, there's always been variations in climate, natural climate, depending on the position of the planet, etc., etc. However, it's very clear the IPCC has said there is over 95% certainty, and that's almost certainty in science terms, that this is being caused by carbon dioxide emissions due to the burning of massive amounts of fossil fuels. I think it's an interesting statistic. Every year the sun, massive amounts of energy hits the sun, it's absorbed by trees and vegetation, they die and they quite often get covered, they get into the ground.
Yeah.
Every year, by burning the amount of coal and oil we're doing, we're throwing 1 million years of stored energy into the atmosphere every year. That's extraordinary experiment to be playing with humanity's future.
But only 70 years ago, we were being told that the world was freezing.
That's correct.
And science then was proven to be wrong. Do you not think that there's a chance that your science might be wrong?
No scientist will tell you I am 100% certain.
Right.
But they do tell you that when they have 95% certainty, that is almost, that is very good in scientific terms. So the question I would say to you, if presuming climate change, that's right, we've got a 90% chance, if continuing the way we're going, of having runaway global warming. Would you want to get onto a plane that had a 95% chance of crashing?
Well, that's a completely erroneous comparison.
Why?
Well, because planes don't have a 95% chance of crashing.
But would you get onto one that had a 90% chance?
It's a ridiculous comparison. I want to get back to the costs of all this.
Sure.
Because we had a global, we had a target in the UK of net zero carbon by 2050. You guys want 2025, right? 6 years away. The estimated cost of this by Philip Hammond was £1 trillion.
Sure.
Where's the money going to come from?
Well, over the next 5 years, the oil and gas corporations, many of whom are based in London, and many of the banks that fund them are based in London, are going to spend $5.2 trillion on finding new fossil fuels. If we could use that $5.2 trillion, instead of finding new fossil fuels that we can't afford to burn, and that was invested in renewable energy.
Why would a private corporation decide to give its money to renewables, which erodes its own customer base? And where's the... Unless you legislate that and make it law, why would they do that?
Well, two things. First of all, you asked me the question, where could the money come from? So my answer is, humanity has the money to do this transformation. And secondly, absolutely right. Why should it be legal? Why should it be legal for our oil corporations to invest $5 trillion in the destruction of humanity? The United Nations, head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said in September 2018, he said, we have 2 years to start radically cutting carbon emissions, or we faced an existential crisis. So therefore, when in any government it has the responsibility of protecting its people, they would have to legislate against activities that threaten the future of Britain.
Yeah,
so I would argue there needs to be legislation to stop this.
Some of those things, to achieve net carbon, zero carbon, we would need to ground all flights. We would need to get rid of 27 million gas boilers. Central heating would presumably not be allowed.
That's correct, yeah.
We'd need to cease production of steel, of aluminium, of cement. Where would we live? In grass huts?
No, there are actually now already. Actually, gas boilers are an interesting one. The replacement of gas boilers by electric boilers means you do have central heating, but it'd be powered by renewable energy. So that is possible if you took a World War II attitude to this. So what we are saying is that Lord Stern, who is the chief economist to the World Bank, when he was working for them, he then did a report for the government, the UK government, looking at the economics of this. And he said this emergency is equivalent of the First World War, Second World War, and the Great Recession put together.
Not in terms of deaths?
In terms of threat to the economy.
Okay.
And so therefore he said, we must take it at that level. And 8 years later, after he produced the report for the government, he was asked, was that an exaggeration? And his response was, he took a breath and he said, okay, well, the science says it's an underestimate. So what I'm saying is that therefore our governments should respond at that level.
Okay, so if we go for net zero and we stop producing steel, aluminium, we turn off the central heating, we don't drive cars, things like that. Surely they're just going to manufacture that stuff in China.
We're not turning off the central heating, we're just changing how we run it.
But I'm talking about the stuff that we produce and manufacture that has a big carbon footprint, which we all know we need to do more about. No one's arguing against that. They'll just make it in China. And so we won't solve the problem, we'll simply displace it.
You're correct. Already a lot of our, through the deindustrialization of Britain, a lot of our carbon footprint has been externalized to other countries. But take, for example, cement. There are already 12-story tower blocks built using wood, using reinforced wood.
That will rot, it won't have the lifespan.
Sorry, look, where are we here? We can see Westminster Abbey just there in the distance.
I can't see any wooden buildings, I'm afraid.
I can see
lots of steel and concrete.
We can see Westminster Abbey.
Yeah.
The timbers in there are probably 800 years old.
Yeah, but it's not a wooden structure. It's
You can actually build structures that last 800 years.
So the future of London is wooden skyscrapers?
Why not?
Because they rot and fall down.
No, because I'm pointing towards a building that's 800 years old. Many concrete buildings were lasted 30 years.
They burned down. Look at Notre Dame Cathedral. I mean, it recently went up in flames.
Concrete buildings get flaws in the concrete, and they have been disappeared. We have built many concrete buildings in London during the lifetime of Westminster Abbey, and that has outlived them all. Anyway,
okay.
It's a day.
So yesterday you said that airports are crime scenes against humanity. What do you mean by that?
I mean that to actually consciously and unnecessarily do damage to the future of humanity is a crime. And so if a family of 4 is taking a flight to Miami, that is around 10 tons of carbon. Now that's around 13 years worth of electricity emissions for an entire household.
But people we don't just fly for pleasure. What about flying in medicines and the stuff we need? So a no-flight economy would cause gross shortages of life-saving medicine.
So if when we talk about a net zero economy, we're talking about net zero, not a zero. There's a subtle difference between net zero and zero. So all we want to do is to eliminate unnecessary carbon. So 70% of flights are taken by the 15 richest people, percentage of the population. The top richest 1% are taking 20% of the flights. Already around 50% of Britons don't fly every year, which is amazing. It's really good news. And so what we're saying is we need to stop the unnecessary flights, and that would leave around maybe 4 to 5% of current flights still taking place for necessary, what we call necessary events. And that can be hopefully dealt with by massive billions of trees being planted.
What would happen in 12 years' time when we get to this apocalyptic scenario that Extinction Rebellion have told us, where billions of people will die and the humanity will be burning? What will happen if that doesn't happen? Sure. And there has been, say, a half-metre rise in sea levels, which presumably humanity will be able to deal with because we're clever and we can adapt. That's why we sort of dominate the planet. If your theories don't come true, which most scientists agree won't happen, where does that leave you guys?
Well, Extinction Rebellion is saying this is a possibility, that in the worst-case scenarios that will happen.
Okay.
That's the position. It's scientists, there are various scenarios, but what we are doing at the moment is we're racing towards the worst. And the worst scenarios is mass starvation and death and massive rises in sea levels. The fact is we don't know. There was a report in the Journal of Academy of Natural Sciences last year called Hot House Earth. And the scientists said we either have passed the tipping point where no matter what we do, we can't stop runaway warming, or it will happen in the next 15 years. So what the Extinction Rebellion is saying is we have possibly a 15-year window to radically change our direction to not have that disastrous runaway climate change. And that's why we are really important. We are the alarm bell in London and in the planet, saying, screaming, we are racing towards a cliff edge. For God's sake, we've got to pull the safety stop and tackle this.
I think every responsible government and citizen would agree that we can do more, and the UK is doing more. I mean, the UK's targets are pretty healthy, right, compared to certainly the third world. I mean, isn't the UK already, in a sense, leading the way?
The UK government has declared a zero carbon target for 2050.
Seems pretty ambitious. It seems reasonable.
But I just told you we already have passed the tipping point. So what our government is saying, the scientists say we may have passed the tipping point. You may have 15 years. You may have 15 years to radically take action. And our government is saying, okay, in 31 years' time, we may actually have reached zero target. So what that is saying, our government is saying for the next 30 years, we are willing to continue throwing oil on the fire. That's literally what they're saying. We will emit millions of tons, hundreds of millions of tons of carbon for the next 31 years. That's not in line with the science.
As well as human, caused global warming, anthropogenic global warming, you are prepared, though, to admit, aren't you, that there are other causal factors, the proximity to the sun, the tilt and the axis of the sun, solar flares, which actually have proven to have a much greater effect than the human effect, and also cloud cover theory. Like, we don't really know, for example, if there's less cloud cover, there's more global warming, and this goes in huge cycles, which we don't really understand. Is it not fair to say that the tranche that you're focusing on, the human tranche, is a relatively smaller one? And what if it's not right? What if you're wrong?
I would be delighted. I could actually go back to living the life the way I live it. I'm a scientist. I'm not a scientist. I did a science degree. Yeah. I went off and did other things. I'm now an eco-auditor. So I would love to go back to living my life as it was. I'd love to be able to fly without having a guilty conscience to Greece. I would love not to have to spend my life sitting in front of a line of police, terrified that I'm going to be arrested. I've been arrested for climate change action. I don't like it. It's horrible. And I don't want to have a criminal record. I would love it. I would want to be wrong. There is possibly a 3 to 4% chance in the science that the science is wrong. I can't sit here in all conscience and say to Britain and to our children that I'm willing to take that risk for you.
It's interesting you talk about children, because I've got young kids, and they are definitely taught about climate change at school. I would say almost as an orthodoxy now, as a new a new irrefutable truth, and we've already sort of highlighted that may not be the case. Do we not think, and I've seen a lot of kids on television, they seem really traumatized by what's going on now. Is that trauma real, or are you frightening a generation and terrorizing them? And I see children really bothered by this, and I feel uncomfortable about that as a parent.
Sure, I hear you. I find that what the legacy we're leaving them and the psychological impacts of that is horrific. There has been studies done on it, and I thought what was really interesting was they said that a lot of children are suffering psychologically from hearing these news stories. But what the counsellor said, you know, the psychotherapist said, is it's a rational fear. He says it's a rational fear. You know, you were talking about ifs and buts, but Extinction Rebellion is not just about climate, it's about a climate and ecological emergency. And so, since I was born, I'm 60 years old.
So I just want to pause for a moment and go back into that, that children thing.
Sure.
So you say it's a rational fear, but if the science is at best, the jury is out, and if we've already established that billions of people won't die within 6 years' time, you know, so if we can therefore conclude from that Extinction Rebellion's tactics could be scare tactics, or at least, you know, dramatic use of language to seize a debate, to get the news agenda going, which obviously has been very successful in capturing the news cycle and the public opinion. Are we not traumatising these children necessarily? I feel uncomfortable about this because I don't believe all of the science you guys, certainly about billions of people dying. But if children believe they're going to be dead in 20 years and that proves to be untrue, surely that's a terrible thing to be doing.
Well, the challenge is that the science says if we continue the way we're going, we'll have runaway climate change. The consequence of that for our current younger generation are cataclysmic. So we have a choice here. Do we use language of pointing out the threat of this happening, or do we just keep our mouths shut and just have a civil, nice debate? And the truth is we've had a civil, nice debate for 30 to 70 years, and what has happened every one of those years, the emissions have gone up. So we have failed those kids by actually using the civil debate. So we need to use the dramatic language that actually points out the risks of the worst case scenarios. And what that has done is successfully put on the table. I wouldn't be here talking to you if we hadn't done that. And what that may do is hopefully make sure that your kids don't end up in a world when they're 60 years old, where the fires are already seeing are out of control, where actually major cities are underwater. Because Jakarta has announced they're going to move their capital. The Indonesia capital is going to move its capital. Lagos is already lapping in its water. So in the third world, which doesn't have the resources that London has to tackle rising sea levels, they're already suffering the impacts, and that will cost trillions of dollars for those cities to move.
Okay, so I just want to wrap up now by thinking about how do you think history will judge Extinction Rebellion? So when we look back, and if these things don't happen, which I think it's fair to say they won't, billions of people aren't going to die, are they, in 6 years' time?
No, not 6 years, no.
So, okay, so how do you think you'll be judged? Do you think you'll be judged as a positive force for good, or a slightly reactionary, middle-class, privileged storm in a teacup?
Well, we're not. Well, we're. If you talk to people on the streets, we're every class, and we're every ideology, we're every colour, we're every race, we're every religion. There's an XR Muslims, there's an XR Christians, there's an XR youth. We are extraordinarily wide in our thing. And my dream memory in history for us is that we'd be forgotten, because we were so successful. People forgot the threat. Just like we're now beginning to forget the threat in the 1960s of the nuclear disaster, and people don't remember much about CND. I would love us to have a thriving nature, a thriving planet. The threat of climate change have receded in the past so much that Extinction Rebellion was got. That's my wish for the future. Well,
you cannot deny or fault your passion. Thank you very much for coming here today. I appreciate it. Cheers. Good man. Well, what a lively debate that was, and people aren't shy about talking about Extinction Rebellion. What do you think? Is it a worthwhile protest movement? Is it necessary to save humanity, or is it all bonkers? Is it just a bunch of privileged people having a nice little swan song around London? Over to you. Get involved across all of our social media platforms. It's your show. Please have your shout. Thanks for tuning in.